Hello, Internet. Welcome to Movies Are Boring, the web show where two defense journalists sit and talk about pop culture in the movies. My name is Matthew Gault. With me, as always, is my co-host Kevin Knodell, the man with the beard. Kevin, say hello.
Hello.
All right, today on Movies Are Boring, we are going to be talking about the 1989 classic Red Scorpion, in which Dolph Lundgren plays a Spetsnaz who is sent into Africa to kill a rebel leader in a country that Russia is oppressing. We're not really clear what the geopolitical relations are there. Russia wants a guy dead, and they send Dolph Lundgren to do it. Dolph Lundgren ends up having other ideas, though.
It is an
And
anti-communist Dances with Wolves.
that's beautiful. I had not thought of it that way, but that is exactly what it is. It is an anti-communist Dances with Wolves. Um, one of the things I thought was kind of funny was there's this weird streak in movies in the 80s where the Cuban military has forces in other countries,
Well,
and they're very active. Go
it's
ahead.
actually not that weird because that was in fact going on a lot in Africa during, not necessarily this time, but a lot of times before that. The Russians didn't really want to go into these countries necessarily, but they were more than happy to suggest that some of their communist allies go in. So there were quite a few hot zones in Africa where Cuban troops were active, including Angola, which I think is kind of what this is based around a little bit.
Yeah, it's not really clear where in Africa we
They're
are.
in the country of Africa, basically.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
it's kind of the whole of Africa. Um, but yes, this fantastic, weird, awful 80s schlock. I actually ended up kind of really loving it. Um,
I
it,
did too.
it is absolutely terrible, but it's Dolph Lundgren running around Africa shooting commies. The
In his
first,
short shorts. Let's not neglect the short shorts.
um, so at a certain point during the movie, he fails in his mission, and he ends up in the desert and goes on like a classic Joseph Campbell style death and rebirth. Gets stung by a scorpion, gets taken in by some bushmen, and they chant over him and turn him into a warrior. Part of this transformation is removing the pant legs on his uniform and just going about in short shorts and sandals for the rest of the movie.
But I feel
Yes,
like did that happen naturally? I don't actually remember. Some of
it,
this stuff is kind of a blur.
it did happen. He gets when he escapes the Russians, he goes into the desert and he doesn't have shoes on, and he rips off his pants and wraps them around his feet, and I think that's how he ends up with the short shorts. Um,
He ripped him off a bit high though, didn't he?
yeah, he ripped him off real high. We got to see a lot of Dolph Lundgren.
No.
Not as much as we do in, say, The Punisher, but, still a lot.
No, it's interesting because the premise lends itself to being something of a thoughtful movie, but it's part and parcel an 80s action film, top to bottom. That's really what this is at the end of the day. There's, and I wrote a little bit about this for the site, some of the kind of checkered history of this film and the way that it got made, funded by some really shady people.
Yeah, I was reading about that. The producer and writer of this is Jack Abramoff. And for those who don't know who he was like a super lobbyist that got busted, uh, involved in a Indian casino scandal. There's a movie starring Kevin Spacey called Casino Jack that's all about him. But and I know that they were being when they were initially producing this movie, they were being boycotted by various countries because they were getting help from like the South African defense troops, and this was at a time that apartheid was still going on. Is that correct?
Apartheid was still very much going on.
Right.
Nelson Mandela was still in prison. All of that was still going on at the time. And importantly, this is a time when people were kind of having second thoughts about these kind of strongman regimes in Africa in particular that were propped up to fight communism. But as people started looking at these regimes more and more, and in particularly the apartheid regime, people were really starting to have doubts about whether it was a good idea to support these regimes, whether it was really in the West's best interest, and if it was actually fighting communism, or whether they were just using that as an excuse to get away with what they were doing. And I think history's kind of borne out more that these guys were using communism as an excuse to do whatever they were going to do.
Well, that's the story over and over again, right? People get empowered to fight X evil, and then they end up going overboard, like you said, history has borne that out time and time again.
But it's interesting because this movie received a lot of funding from people who were invested in that narrative, so they needed to remind people that communists were active in Africa, and communists are bad. And the communists in this movie are very, very bad.
Yeah, it's very, very blatantly evil. They go in and they firebomb villages, and you get to see the devastation caused by Russian gunships coming down. Like the scene where there's a scene where there's a gathering, and they're listening to the African guerrillas who are resisting the communists are gathering around listening to a broadcast of their leader, and this Russian gunship flies over and drenches them in an accelerant that's not really named, but it's like gasoline or something, and
everybody puts on gas masks, so it may or may not be a poisonous agent. It's not real clear. It's not really important. It was very bad.
Right. A gunship sprays them with an accelerant of some kind, and they're kind of looking around, and then these Russian troops come out with flamethrowers and just start mowing everyone down with them. It was awful.
And their space age flame-proof suits.
Mm-hmm. I did love that. Oh, this movie's so wonderfully bad. It's people should really watch it because it does occupy that very narrow space where something is so bad that it's good. It fits in there super well. Yeah, the action is cheesy, limbs get blown off. It's a good time.
But not just that. I think it's so absurd that it's just fascinating, given the production history of this film and what it kind of represents as kind of a time capsule toward the late 80s and just this era of film. And the kind of, it's not really, only one character is American, and interestingly, he occupies kind of the ugly American stereotype. It also is very much an American action movie, despite none of the principal characters really being American.
Yeah, because Dolph Lundgren's Swedish, right?
Right.
And they used a lot of Native Africans for the African roles. I want to talk about the American character who's a journalist named Dewey. He's played by, and I'm going to look this up real quick. Sorry, Internet. I think it's C. Emmett Walsh. M. Emmett Walsh, that's his name. M. Emmett Walsh, who is most famous, I think, for Blood Simple. He's the creepy private detective in the first Coen Brothers movie. His character in this movie is so fantastic. He is the stereotypical ugly American, playing rock and roll music way too loud, cursing as much as he possibly can throughout the whole movie just because he can. Fat, hates communists. He's fantastic, and he kind of gives this overblown performance that somehow endears you to him.
Well, because he's such an all-American guy. I mean,
mm-hmm.
He's a man's man. He likes whiskey and freedom and hamburgers.
Yes, there's a great scene where they're sitting around the fire eating whatever they're eating as a portion of the movie that are on the run. And he's talking about how he can't wait to get back home to eat a hamburger. And then Dolph Lundgren tells him that he curses too much. which is very bizarre. One of the 5 lines of dialogue that Lundgren has in the entire movie. Oh, so good.
He doesn't talk a lot, but when he does, it's magical.
Oh yeah, it's like every line of dialogue he has is the best cheesy action one-liner in every movie from the '80s. It's magnificent. What other notes do you have on this? What else are you thinking about?
One of the things that I thought was, it interested me at least, was the way that the communist forces were portrayed and the kind of sullen suspicion that they all had for one another.
Yeah, I liked that too. Like because there's Cuban and Russian forces
and Czechs.
And Czechs, yeah, because Lundgren's character is Czech, so they call him a Czech bastard at the very beginning.
Well, no, he's the one who's insulting all the other Czechs. Lundgren's Russian.
Okay, I guess I missed that in the bar scene. I apologize. He calls somebody else a Czech bastard and then punches him
right
at the very beginning of the film. But yeah, like all the different groups are very much suspicious of each other, just like you were saying. I'm sorry I cut you off.
Well, no, I think it's interesting the way that that's portrayed, because when you have the Americans and like the Brits are like allied groups hanging out with one another in these kind of 80s movies, typically they kind of give each other a hard time and are like playfully insulting well. Whereas in this movie, they're putting up this facade of getting along very well, but in fact, they don't trust each other at all. And I think that's sort of...
No, because they...
Yes?
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I think that's an interesting kind of commentary, and also it lends to the propaganda aspect of this, showing the exploitive relationship that the Soviet has with its satellite countries and with its allies, and also suggesting that the Soviet communist world may not be as unified and powerful as we might think it is.
Well, that was important to our propaganda at the time, right? To make this evil empire a little bit less scary. I loved that. I thought it was. Could we talk about the torture scene a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. One note: Tom Savini does a lot of the special effects for all that, who people might know from Dawn of the Dead, the original, and a lot of other horror films.
That is why it was so good then. It was really uncomfortable to watch. It's a very simple, pretty quick torture scene, but basically, after Lundgren's failed his mission and before he goes out into the desert to find himself and do the Dances with Wolves bit, he'd killed a whole bunch of Cubans. So the Russians, when they decide that he's failed and they're done with him, give him over to the Cubans, and the Cubans, before they're going to execute him, decide to torture him because it's a bad 80s movie. And the guy does it with these really long needles, and it's a really weird scene. I was detecting like sexual tension there. Am I crazy?
No, I don't think so. There was definitely a sexual aspect to that.
He like leans in real close, and he's got the needles, and he's whispering sweet nothings in Dolph Lundgren's
because he's
ear.
penetrating him with the needles, and as he's penetrating, he's deriving this weird kind of sexual pleasure from it.
Yeah, it was very, very odd and off-putting. And I'm glad you mentioned the thing about the special effects guy, because it looks like Lundgren's actually getting pierced with these needles for all the world. Like, it looked very real. It was off-putting and uncomfortable. But I guess torture scenes are supposed to be. Let's see. Well, do you have anything else, Kevin?
No, I don't think so.
No, I think this went really well. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm going to take us off live now. So, Internet, thank you for watching. We played this one a little fast and loose. It was a little bit different, so please leave your comments below. Also, click the link below. Kevin has written a beautiful little piece kind of all about this movie. And you guys, it's on Netflix. You should really watch it. It's a lot of fun in a horrible kind of 80s action movie way. And we will see you next time.